Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session of the Data Doctor. Today, we're going to talk about conditional statements, if-then statements, case statements, and also something that was introduced a couple of years ago, an in statement. And then we're also going to talk about how we can join those two things together using and or ors. And we're going to talk about what these conditional statements really do. Let's start by looking at how they work. First of all, they're logical expressions. You'll see people talk about logical expressions or condition statements. They all work at the record level, right? And that's the record that you're showing in the viz. And they all have one thing in common. There's a test condition. And based on that test condition, like category equals furniture, for example, if that record is true, then you execute a then statement. If category equals furniture, then some sales, for example. If it's false, you move on to the next record and you begin to check that next record. Let's see how this actually works in practice. And I want to take a look at just a very simple if statement. And you've seen this sort of thing before. The syntax on this starts with the keyword if, and then this is followed by a dimension. If furniture, if category equals furniture, then sales, else zero. So the keywords here are if, then, and end. So our test condition is if category equals furniture. If that returns a true, then sales, else end. And that will return this using Superstore data. The category equals furniture. We have values in for sales. For everything else, we have a zero. Now we can expand that statement to include another test condition. We're going to look at the first test condition. If category equals furniture, then sales, that's what we saw up here. Else if it doesn't equal furniture, let's go on and check another condition, another test. And this test is region equals east. And the connector here is another keyword. It's else if. Okay, it's not else space if, it's else if. Else if region equals east, then sales end. And when we do that, you can see here in this group, we have the category equals furniture, so we get sales. And in the eastern region, when region equals east, we get all of the sales for the eastern region. So we can use if-then statements to create groups. We can also use them on measures, not just on dimensions. And let's see how that might work here. And you've probably done this sort of thing already, where you've taken a measure, and here I've used the sum of sales. If the sum of sales is less than 10,000, then I want to put this label on it. I want to group those together, and we're going to call that less than 10,000. Else if we're going on to the next group. So any record that has sales greater than 10,000 passed through this first condition. And now we're looking at the second condition. So we know that there are no records in here less than 10,000. So all we have to do is check the upper bound here. I want to check for sales, the sum of sales less than 20,000, and I'll put that in the second group, 10 to 20K. And then else if, and we're going to look at 30,000 and put it in the 30,000 group and the 40,000 group. And then we have this other statement down here, this other key word, else. And what that's really saying is that take anything that's left over, anything that hasn't fallen into one of these four groups, put it in this other group called greater than 40. And when we do that, you can see how these categories would line up in the different groups. So we can use if-then statements to create groups. We can also use them in branching and in other test conditions that we've seen before. You've seen me use this to do a test condition based on a LOD expression. And I want to show you how the syntax of this works with an LOD expression. Here, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at each category. And now the test itself and the condition is placed inside the LOD expression. And I'm going to bump this up and make it a little bit larger so you can see it. It's placed inside the LOD expression. The test is not outside the LOD expression. We're not going to do the test to see if the order is in the last completed month. We're not going to do that outside the LOD expression. We're going to put it inside the LOD expression. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at the fixed category, and if the month of today minus 1, the last completed month, equals the month of the order date, then we're going to record the sale. And in that way, we're going to get an LOD expression that gives us the sales in the last completed month. And we can look at the prior month's sales and another LOD expression. And here we're going to look at 2 months back so that we get the sales in the last completed month, the sales in the prior month, and then we just take the difference between those two to get the month-over-month sales. But here we're using an if-then statement or a conditional statement inside an LOD expression, and that's the proper way to do it. Well, we have if-then statements, and if-then statements can be used for branching, they can be used for grouping. We also have other types of conditional statements, and one of those is a case statement. And a case statement has a different syntax, and it works a little bit different than an LOD or a if-then statement. And I want to start with this very simple example, and I want to just group records based on region. And the case statement syntax starts with the word case. It's then followed by this is the test that you're going to look at. We're going to use region in the test, and then there's a series of tests that we're going to do. And we're going to say, well, a case on region, when, which is a keyword, when the region is east, then coastal, and then I'm going to check the next level. If it's not east, what am I going to do? When it's west, it's coastal. And if it's not either one of those, we execute an else statement. We call it middle, and that's going to return these values here. Now, it's important to note the case statements work on equalities. Okay, the region has to exactly equal east. And when I say exactly, we're talking about in terms of capitalization and everything else. It has to exactly equal literally east as it's written in the actual data source. Okay. If-then statements can work on inequalities. That's where they can use greater than or less than. Case statements only work on equalities, but they're very useful, and we can use them in a variety of situations. Here's a second example where we take a case statement, and this statement, we're going to create a case on dimensions. And what I wanted to use this statement for is to have the actual measure be different based on the segment. And here we're using case, and when the case is consumer, we want the viz to show the sum of sales. When it's corporate, I don't want to see sales, I want to see the sum of quantity. And when it's home office, I want to look at the sum of sales divided by the sum of quantity. Now you notice here I'm using an aggregation, so this is the sum of sales and the sum of quantity. Have to aggregate the case statement, and I aggregated it with min, and you could also use ATTR here. You end the case statement with an N. Okay, so now in our viz, for consumer, we're looking at the sum of sales. For corporate, we're looking at quantities, and for home office, we're actually looking at ASP values. Well, if we can do that hard-coded, we can also do something similar to that with a parameter. And we can use parameters in case statements. We can also use them in if-then statements. So this gives you the flexibility. Here I've just created a very simple parameter, and in the parameter we looked at three values: sales, profit, and quantity. And I'm going to open up the parameter so that you can see it. We edit the parameter. It's just a simple string parameter. And we're going to display sales profit, profit and quantity, and the value is going to be those literal values. They're going to be string values. And this case statement says I'm going to look at that parameter value, and when the value is sales, I want this entire viz to show me sales, the sum of sales. And when it's quantity, I don't want sales, I want quantity. I want the sum of quantity. And when it's profit, I want the sum of profit. So we can use our case parameter. Now we're looking at quantity. Now we're looking at sales. You can use the case statement to branch and show different results in your viz based on a user selected parameter. I'm going to show you how we can also use a case statement in an LOD expression inside a case statement. I don't necessarily recommend this, but I do want to show you how it's done. We're going to take this case statement, and what we've done up to this point is we made a case statement on either a dimension or a measure. Now we're going to make our case statement based on a calculation, and you can use the the calculation we're using here is an LOD expression, and all I'm doing is looking at the name of the customer name by year of order date. And I want to count the number of orders that each customer had in each fiscal year. And when that returns a value of 1, then I'm going to put a label on it, one-time buyer. When it returns a value of 2, it's two-time buyer. 3, three-time buyer, and more than that, I'm going to call them a frequent buyer. I've just arbitrarily made those categories. So when I use those as labels in my viz, one-time buyer through frequent buyer, and I count the customers, we now have the count of customers who purchased only one time in 2019 or 2 times in 2019 and so on. So we can use case statements to create groups. We can use case statements with based on a calculation. We can use case statements based on dimensions or measures, but we have to remember that the test is always an exact measure. It's an equality. We can't use it with greater than or equal to. I'd like to move on now to how we can combine statements together. We're going to first take a look at an OR statement here. And we're also going to look at an AND statement. This is just a simple OR statement. And this is how would you combine two conditions together. I've got two test conditions. I've got one, the first test is the category equals furniture. I can get a true out of this statement, or I can get a false out of this statement. But when the category equals furniture, I'm going to get a true. And then I have a choice of two conjunctions here, or and. Okay, and we're first going to look at or. In this case, the second test condition is region equals west. So if the category equals furniture or the region equals west, return sales. So I get a value here and I see all the furniture sales, and I also see all the sales in the west. I could have used and here, and in that case, we only get a result when both of these conditions return a true. I have a category equals furniture, that's true, and also region equals west, that's true. When both of those conditions are true, we return the sales. And we can use that as a way to group things together. For example, here's just a scatter plot. And in the scatter plot, I was looking at sales versus profit. And the condition that we've got here is this condition. And I wanted to take a look at all the sales by subcategory and region, all of those points that have sales, the sum of sales greater than 10,000, and that's this group greater than 10,000, or the sum of profit was negative. So we can see here that's going to return a true. Both of these things have to be true. This is true and that's true. And we don't have to do an if then, if you will. We can do this as a Boolean and just return a true or a false. So all of that's true when either the sales are greater than 10,000 or the profit is less than zero. And we also look at this statement, which is the and version of that statement. This just looks at, I want to look at only those categories that have both sales greater than 10,000 and profits less than zero. And that's this group. That's where returns are true and everything in blue is false. And if you compare those, for example, just on a dashboard, put them both on the same dashboard, this is our or condition. Either of the statements, sales greater than 10,000 has to be true, or profit less than zero have to be true, and we'll return a true. In the and statement, both conditions have to be met to return a total true for the statement. Okay, sales greater than 10,000, profits less than zero. Okay, now I want to introduce a new statement or a different type of statement, and I guess people who write SQL have used this for a long time. I don't, quite honestly, I don't write SQL, so I'm not familiar. Using an in statement was something that was new to me when this first came out. This came out in, I think it was 2020.3, I think was the release that that came out with this. But I want to take a look at an in statement and how in works. And here's the statement itself. This much is the conditional in statement. What in is going to do is we can look at, in this case, we're going to look at a dimension, and the dimension we're looking at is state. If that is in, and we can put a list, or we can use a set, or we can use a combination of values that we want to use as a in our test case. So we're only interested here if the state is either Ohio, Indiana, or New York. And if that returns a true, if the state is in this group of Ohio, Indiana, and New York, the statement will return a true. And the then part after the test is sales and an in. And you can see when I put this on the Viz, we're only seeing sales for Indiana, New York, and Ohio. And if I just pull this off just to show you that all of those values can be recorded there, but when we use that in statement, we're only looking at sales in those three areas. Well, it becomes kind of useful to use that type of logic in a variety of situations. I'm going to show one here. We know how to get quarter sales and monthly sales just using date functions, but very often people like to look at half year sales. They like to look at the first half of the year versus the last half of the year. Well, one way of getting those is a case statement. And here we're going to use a case statement combined with an in statement. So the case is on the month of order date. When, and that's the keyword for the case, when the month of the order date is in this group, it's in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then that I'm going to call first half. When it's in the month is returned as 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or July through December, I want it in the second half, end. And using that, we can then break our chart up into first half sales or second half sales. And we've got region in here, and we don't need to have region in there. But we can break our sales up any way that we would choose to look at in the first half of the year or the second half of the year. Well, if we have items that are in a category and we can test for what's in the category, we can also test for items that are not in that category. And here's an example, and we're going to take a look at two different examples here. sorry. We're going to take a look at a couple of different examples here. And the first thing I want to do is I want to just create a parameter here. And I'm going to use this parameter in a couple of different examples. And this is just a parameter to get the top end sales. And I just have it set at 4 right now. Okay. And then I'm going to take that parameter and I'm going to use it to create a set. Okay. And it's right here. I've gone out to create a set on subcategories, and when they're in the top n, we're going to return a positive based on sum of sales. So now I've got a set based on a parameter, and I can come back in this group, and very often we get users who want to know values in the top end and other. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that not statement when the subcategory is not in the top n as defined by the parameter, then call it other. So I've created this group of other using not in as the test condition. So if it's not in the top n, it's other, else it is in the top n. I want to know what the subcategory is. And that creates, and I place that on the chart, and that creates this. I get the top n and other, and it's all based on this parameter. We can cut this down to 2, and we can see that we're now looking at the top values and other. Well, we can extend that a little bit. Quite often we have users who want to look at that dynamically. They come back and they say, I'd like to do that top end and other, but I want it dependent on region. Because if I just do a simple top end and other, I get the overall top end, I get the overall 2, and not by region. Well, we can use that same logic to create a top end by region. And we're going to start here by looking at, first I want to create an LOD, and that because we need the sum of sales at the region level and the subcategory level. And we need those so that we can use a ranking function in our top end calculation. So we've got that value. I'm also going to come back, and I'm just going to show you right now, I'm going to use that in a rank. And then I'm going to create a set based on that. And my set, once again, is just the top end based on this parameter of my LOD expression, sales by region. Okay. And I'm going to come back again and use that same logic that we used before. If the subcategory is not in this set that we created, call it other. If it is in the region, call it subcategory. So now I've got a other, and I've got a category based on this top end parameter. And we can change that parameter, and we can start looking at here. We've got other chairs and phones, phones and chairs, chairs and phones. You're saying, well, that sounds an awful lot like it's just looking at those two categories, chairs and phones. But if we look a little deeper into this, we can see that within each category, we are now looking at the top end, because in the central and east category, the top end category, top end subcategories are storage, chairs, and phones. But in the south and in the west, they are phones, chairs, and tables. So we've created a way using this not in condition, the logic in that, to create a top end and other calculations. And this is really very easy to do. I've had to do this before using nested table calculations. Doing it this way is much, much easier. So I recommend that to you. Now, one more condition that I want to show you, and that's how to use a conditional statement inside of a table calculation. And we know table calculations are calculated last in the order of expression, order of operation. So we should be able to use a table calculation in there, or a conditional statement in there. And let's see how that is done. And the key here, I'm just calculating the running sales or the running total, and I'm using a window sum function to do that. Yes, I could use running total, but or running sum, but I wanted to use window sum to show you how it's done here. Now the condition statement, the if category equals furniture, is placed inside the table calculation. It becomes the first argument or the first clause in the table calculation. And because we're using a table calculation, we have to have a sum. We do a total on that. So you would read here is if the category equals furniture, then sales, sum that value from the first value to the current value. So that's just the running total of values for furniture only. Now these are total sales, and this is furniture only. Okay. Now we can come back and we create another condition, and this is just that same formula again, divided by the window sum of sales. And the window sum of sales is this value right here. It's the total value of the sales. So what I wanted to do is on a running basis, I wanted to calculate the running total of furniture only compared to the total value. And you can see over the course of the entire 4-year period, furniture represented 32.4% of the total sales. But the key here is to understand that you can use a conditional statement inside of a table calculation. And just like we learned on the LOD expressions, you put that conditional statement inside the formula for the table calculation, not outside the table calculation. Well, that's what I wanted to share with you this morning. I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned something. Like everything we learn, you need to practice it. You need to go out, you need to use it. And I hope on your next viz that when you have a chance to use a conditional statement, you go out and use it. Everything that you saw this morning is already out on my blog. If you go to jimdehner.com, there's a blog out there that looks just like this, and that encompasses all the conditional statements, the if, then, and and statements we looked at today. This workbook can also be downloaded directly from my Tableau public site. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you starting next year. This is kind of the end of the year. Around the holidays, I'm not going to do another Data Doctor this calendar year, but I hope to see you next calendar year, and I hope everybody has a very happy holiday season and also a safe new year. Thank you very much. Bye now.